Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we are going to be doing a sort of a mini track from scratch. So, glasses are coming off now. I'm going to be showing you how to make this thing, and I'm going to, in a few videos, I'm going to explain atmosphere. I'm going to explain some mixing things. Now, it hasn't been mixed. Don't claim it's been mixed. I know it could be cleaner and clearer and better, but there are some tricks you can do while you're working to help things just stand out more. Also, we're going to be talking about the effects that are used in here, meaning like things like this, some creative ways of creating risers so that you don't have to go digging through your sample packs for them. And then also the bass sound, the sound design, and I might do a separate video for my contact library choices and things because I did grab special libraries for special reasons, and a lot of them are pretty expensive. So you guys might not be as interested because you simply just don't have those tools. When you start accumulating these tools, it's kind of nice because you can be like, oh yeah, I have a dope thing over here. I'm going to grab that instead of this other thing I used to grab. So let's go ahead and just start off with the playthrough. So here's the playthrough of this thing. And here we go. That's all I have thus far. As working on this actually took me a really long time. So this video is going to be on the bass sound. I'm not going to focus on the other things, but we'll talk about this, chord traces, notes, color tones, all that fun stuff. But the bass, I started off, so this whole thing started because I wanted to refresh my mind on a bass sound I'd made previously. And if you're not familiar with this particular kind of bass, it's a very dense bass. It's basically the way you introduce filters into your signal chain has a big impact in your phaser. The phaser's like the secret key here. So if you can combine your filtering and your phasering just the right way, you will get a cool thing. And then I used a couple other techniques to get it to timbre that I did not implement as a dynamic change, meaning I'm not automating them, but there are some things I could have done. I'll show you. There are things that I could do more to this sound. So yeah, this other stuff we'll talk about in time. I think overall it's actually pretty darn clear for how loud everything is. Everything is just really loud right now. And so when I bring everything down and mix it all in and include panning, a lot of things like the brightness of my snare when the bass is on versus off will be sort of cleared up. So I mean, there is like panning in this technically because of like stereo effects, but it's not like been deliberately decided panning in the context of balance. So, okay, let's just talk about this bass. So this bass, the way it works is there is these automations, and all these automations are obviously controlling something. And I start out sort of teasing the listener with this bass sound. So here's what it sounds like. And so it's like, oh, the thing happened there. So all these things are basically just filtered versions of the full thing over here, and I let it open right here. So that's what's going on. Now let's talk about how to make this sort of a sound, because it's as I said, it's a complicated sound. And so here is the patch that is this sound. And there's a couple controls. I'll even move them a little bit. I just gotta have to remember not to save whatever I do. So I'll move a couple of these controls just to show you how crazy a couple of these buttons are. So it's based on the phaser. And so, whoops, I did not want all that other stuff. Okay, so it's based on the phaser. And if I go to my phaser and I simply turn the width down a little bit, that's like a enormous temporal change, and that can affect mixing quite a bit. If we move it up a little bit, like I'm not even sure if you saw that change, but it's definitely audible. If we move it like way up, so you just have this huge palette of choice, because that's the original. It's the phaser that makes this difference. And what you can do is you can use the width and the offset to sort of tune it to the sound that you want. And also, it's pretty interesting to look at these if you switch the scale. I stuck with octave, but you can get some pretty cool results using other scales. We also have cascade. There's obviously, if you change the phaser itself, it's going to be quite drastic. But I was a fan of this one. And so I have videos on what a phaser is in the FL12 effects series, so you can go check those out there. It's basically a series of band notch filters in this particular case. In other cases, it's actually like it could be resonance. It sort of is in the context of whatever effect you're using based on how they implemented it, because it uses a delay line to try and cancel out using phase what's going on. But you could add the signals or you could subtract the signals. So some phasers actually are pretty resonancy. Other phasers like this one, since it's additive, they used a series of band notch filters, I believe, because they just said don't use this frequency, and they can create these holes in really dynamic ways. And I mean, technically that's not really a phaser, but it's been termed a phaser because it receives the same effect as a phaser, as in you're canceling frequencies at particular moments through phase. But we're not really using phase. I don't know, maybe they are using phase. I didn't make this thing, but I don't know. That's just my understanding of what's going on here, okay? So we have a filter moving around. You notice there's a pitch movement going around, so just take note of that. So what is the deal with these guys? So the phaser takes our signal, right? We create this signal. Whoop, here's our signal. And then we put holes in our signal. So do holes all over our signal. And these holes are moving around, getting bigger and smaller. And then I said, let's filter it too, because if we just let it rip on the high frequencies all the time, it's going to be horribly just bright. You just don't want it that bright. So, but I'm moving it around completely, and that's because I'm following it up with a crap ton of posts. And don't worry, we'll talk about the posts. There's a reason why things are there. So, but at the base, sound phaser, basic sound, right? So then I said, all right, well, it's kind of boring if I don't have, if like that's okay, I guess. But it doesn't have that same whooshy feeling. So I put a chorus on, and the chorus's depth is pretty high. All things considered, this is like almost as high as you can go, and the speed is very high. This is a very audible effect, but it creates a washing effect. And I chose a square wave because the square wave lends itself to this sort of sound. It lends itself to this washed out sound. If I choose like a saw wave, it's what people would call sharper. In this case, it's not a good thing. It's like, that sounds like a vocoder. Basically, we've made a vocoder synthesizer now. Like, it's talking to us. But I didn't want that. I wanted it. That's so cool. I love these sorts of sounds. Okay, so after I did the chorus, right? Chorus is CPU efficient. So if you could use chorus instead of unison to achieve an effect like that, then you probably should. So, but then I wanted unison, and I think I had it just at 2. And if you listen, okay, now listen to the before and after. So if we listen, the sound is consistent the entire time. Well, now you can do, we can turn on our unison, right? And that introduces we have these controls here. Don't worry about the phase. Like, you could do things with the phase, but we have panning, right? So we just cloned our bass using unison, and now we've got 2 of them, and we've panned them a little bit. And then we're going to create a pitch difference in 1 at certain moments in time, which will cause a detune effect to occur at certain moments in time. And that is what this top one is controlling. So if we listen, over here. It adds character to the sound. Like if we take it away, there's an element of rhythmic character that has been removed. It's like, and it's also a bit brighter. So if we take this, it'll cancel out some of those upper frequencies for us, and character is added. Well, 3 is quite severe. You can hear 3 very easily. In fact, let's do that. So like listen to 3. And so if we take it, now I had that effect, but I just want to bring it back a notch. So that's the ideal of the pitch movement. And if I come in here, I could like bring this up for longer and it'll be a little more obvious. So you see it's like wow, like wow. Yeah. Okay, cool. So that's what that's doing. It's not that crazy. That's the rule of that. That's the rule of the phaser. Now let's talk about this filter. You notice I'm on the Leaky low pass filter. You might be going, how did you pick the Leaky low pass filter? Well, turns out that all low pass filters aren't the same, right? So we know a low pass filter lets low frequencies through and it takes high frequencies and filters them away. But it can leave some high frequencies there. Maybe it's not a very good filter. Maybe it's got a leak. And so some of the frequencies don't exactly get filtered out. And so that's the goal here. I didn't want to remove all the spectrum. I have a more intense low pass filter followed up later in the signal chain. So that's what's going on. And there's an interesting control here you can mess with, and it's called the width of the filter. It controls basically the steepness of the cutoff. So if we make it like if we just bring it up, it's very, very unforgiving. It's just like, wow, like it's very choppy. You know, that could be really, really important sometimes. But if we bring it back down, and that thing sort of whip off, like, what? And so that was important to me. Basically, the whip didn't come from this. This just gave this signal a little bit longer time to exist. Like when the filter cuts off, it doesn't cut off as soon as the filter's there. It cuts off slightly after. Like there's a slight delay, you know? So it's like if you were to turn off a light switch and it lasts just that little bit longer before the light turns off. And so that allows things like the whip right here that I automate in, because, you know, we're being musical. That allows that to translate better than before. Like if we bring it back up. Not quite as translated. And it would actually be pretty fun because now we have an idea of what this is doing. What if we made the middle of the automation really tight by automating this on like that and then removing it like so? We could maybe enhance the sound in an interesting way. So like we could even try that. Let's do it, right? Where's my window? Here it is. Okay, so we're going to automate this. Has been automated, and so we're gonna have it start really tight and then it'll open up right over here. And so let's bring it back down. So you can see the things that the width does to our sound. So that's really great. So let's go ahead and talk about now I was messing with EQ in here because this EQ is pretty special, but I decided against it. I don't know why I'm telling you that. Anyways, there's resonance. And so here's the resonance. And I brought it up. Now, the resonance, if you bring it up this much, you're going to want to watch the width. And I had post-processing in mind, right? Because I'm like, okay, if I bring this resonance up, it's going to sound really bright right where the filter's at. So this filter's moving around. And that's going to make our resonance move around wherever the filter's at. It's just that's what resonance does in a filter. So if we have no resonance, you see the resonance is like a mega important setting. So this gives us a formants equality. It's what makes it sound almost like it's talking. So it's like wah, 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 wah. And the width controls how widespread the resonant is from the filter cutoff. If it's really close to wherever, if it's really small width, it's going to sound super bright. Like I'm even kind of scared. Like you can hear it. That's screaming like, wah, 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 wah. Like, nah, I'm not about that life, man. So, let me go back repeatedly. I brought it all the way up so that it would be a widespread deal. So it would come across many frequencies. And this allows me in post-processing to grab it, strangle it by the neck, and smooth it out. Now, there are some effects going on. I didn't touch the advanced or the image tab. So in the effects, besides the chorus, there is a distortion. It's on hill. And this, okay, explaining, I'm not really sure how to explain this to you in a way that would make very much sense. But essentially, I chose the hill distortion. I just chose a distortion. I scrolled through. I tried log and a couple others. Cube. I believe these actually refer to the equations they use, like a logarithmic function versus a cubic function. But I don't know, because they have things like flat hat, and I'm not sure what that means. Maybe that's a static value, a constant, rubber, ribbon. You got me. Maybe those are the shapes of the functions. Maybe they're just names. Who knows? This is called hill. So maybe it's a parabola of some, or a polynomial. I don't know. So we have distortion, and we have amount and wet, right? Those are the big ones we care about. Don't touch asymmetry. I only touch it if I'm going for something pretty specific. In this case, it adds really nice grit, but then your session is going to pop all the time. And I'm not about that pop in life recently. So we have AMT, amount, and it's pretty low. And the wet, now there's an interesting relationship here. As the amount increases, it's like a send effect. But if you have the wet up, that's going to increase it so that there's more wet sound. So we're keeping our dry sound and mixing it with this knob. And we're changing the degree of mix sort of with this knob. So like that sounds really fancy. Basically, move the knobs up and down and just pay attention to the balance that changes. And you'll be like, oh, what's one that you really like? So if you overdo this, you get a pretty gritty sound. And I wanted that washed out sound, which is why I am having a hard time explaining why I went to the distortion. But I knew I wanted it. Basically, when you go to distortion, it's usually to bring out elements of a signal in a way that will make them strike the ear. I think that's a good way of saying it. So that's all I'm going to say about the distortion. So we got that. We got the chorus. I'm assuming I assumed that you knew what a chorus was, but if you don't, it's covered in the FL12 effects series. And that is all that's going on here. There's nothing else, I believe, I really touched. Now, normally with basses, I will grab the sub knob and do some nifty stuff and then deal with it in post. In this case, I have a very short kick. If we go to our kick here and play it. So this kick is like the way I anticipated mixing it included I took it into account when I was making the bass. So I knew I was just not going to have any of those. In fact, I think I even low pass this thing. I mean, high pass it at some point. Yep, I do a little bit. And the kick's resonance is right over here. So it's like, get out of the way of the kick. So the bass is not the driving force in the sub. It's a color bass, meaning it contributes to the general timbre of the track. So, okay, cool. That's what's going on there. Now, let's go ahead. Oh, I think I took no, this doesn't matter. Okay, so, okay. If I said okay enough. Let's talk about another pretty advanced part of this bass. This is the filter. So we know that this is that unison moving up and down, creating that timbral characteristic change. This is the filter, right? And so you can spend a long time making filter automation movements. I wish more tutorials sort of talked about it. So filter automation movements are fundamental to bass design, right? And what it is we want to create a rhythm that is interesting. And so I wanted my filter to come up, turn on for a second, turn off. You're like, how did you approach this curve? And the answer is, well, let me just play it for you first. And so I knew I wanted it to crescendo at the end, and I knew I wanted it to have some sort of a compelling syncopation at the beginning. A syncopation, for those of you who don't know, it's just not where you expect it to be. That's a good way of saying it. So normally things are like dun, 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 dun. Like it's very expected. But if you go dun, 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 all those things that were not on dun, 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 dun were considered syncopations. And you can have different degrees of syncopation. So usually when people talk about syncopation, there's like a certain limit that you're like, oh, okay. This is like dun to dun to dun to dun to dun to dun to dun. Once it becomes expected, it's not a syncopation anymore. It's expected. So you have to change it up. So you go dun 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 all that stuff. And there's things that come into play here, like how loud a certain beat is over another beat. So here I am messing with the idea of syncopation. And these tiny little movements straight up like this create the character of like a real player. If this was like an instrument someone could play and they're like a master at it, they would add these subtle nuances to their sound. So it's like, and then this is slightly off. Okay, so there's like, we could talk a long time about just delaying a note by just a tiny amount and like the effect that has. Because one would be bum ba bum, or it could be bum ba bum, bum ba bum, bum ba bum. Like, I don't know. These are terrible examples. I should really get some like audio examples or something. But when you do them, if you just talk to any drummer, they'll tell you that delaying notes is tricky business because it can completely change the feel of your song. So here I wanted that lax feel. So I put down a point that's off the grid. I did not snap this to anything and then moved it around using Alt until I found a spot that was lax because I wanted something that was like do wow, 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 wow. So this is basically a borrowed time meter thing going on here. So normally things are expected as 1, 2, 3, 4, but you could also go triple it, triple it, triple it. So I'm doing one of those dun 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 here, but I'm only doing one of them. So that's like, if you were to analyze this, you could say that. So that's some of the automation decisions that are going into it. I didn't want beat 1 to be emphasized, and I'm doing some things with other stuff on beat 1 that allow it to take on a different character change. And then on beat 2, a filter's featured, another character change. And then, of course, I have that sort of weird triple borrowed time thing going on here just for a moment. And then we go back and so on. So this is like, we're kind of microscopically looking at like what this is doing. But let's talk about these two guys. So these are the filters. And so there's the filter 1, filter 2. So I'll grab the EQ all the time. And what I'll do is I'll grab two things and I'll move them around. And I know this looks kind of random, but these are actually all in very specific spots that I did later for mixing reasons. I believe this one's for the snare. So that I know this, I'm going to make a large hump that's going to move around in my sound, right? But I don't want this large thing to get in the way of my song all the time. So I anticipate areas of buildup and create dips in my spectrum so that while there is a big boost there, it's not as big as it was gonna be. So I can still be creative and do what I want. And then I can deal with that more later in the mix. So once I have this going on, I can smooth it out later with more EQs. And I have like a dynamic EQ right around 2K, which is, I'm dipping just below it. So I could have made this dip more severe, might have helped. But there's reasons why dynamic EQ would be better to use. So, okay, so that was a lot of talking. Now let's look at some of the examples. So we have our two boost filters, band 4 and band 6. Those are these guys, and they're both peaking filters. The goal of these is I sort of restrict 4 to the low end. The automation is generally below, so it's moving around. And sounds that are interesting to the human ear of this nature have resonancy qualities in the 500 to like, well, you could go as low as 300, maybe about 300 to like 1K is like where the interesting stuff happens. Maybe like 1.5K. That's like, we're really sensitive to those ranges. So if we could create resonance movements there, it'll make this sound a little more interesting. So that's what these are doing. And these I don't go as, so filter movements you can be pretty specific with. These are general tone color movements. So when you're doing these automations, you say, do I want a color movement here? And I did. So I said color movement here, subtle color movement, and more color movement. And here, this thing, 6 is just running all across the spectrum. It's just done by ear. So, and then the idea is they combine and will uncombine. And then sometimes I'll even have notch filters running around. You can do interesting things with bandpass filters, which is similar sounds are also done this. So this is like the inverse sort of the bandpass approach. The bandpass approach is actually kind of arguably better for reasons that you are only cutting frequencies, so it'll fit in your mix way better. But it accomplishes what I think you could call just a duller sound which is not saying that the sound is bad. It's just a different sound. So I wanted something that was sort of bright and stuck out more. If you're going to do that, you're going to end up undoing your bandpass movement later via compression, and that has its own side effects. So yeah, that's like sort of a really complicated topic. So that's actually the bass at that point. The rest is just sort of cleanup work, and there is a couple more. Okay, there's a couple more things, but that's like the majority of the bass. We have Maximus here. So if I were to get rid of all these extra effects, and here's what's coming out of Harmor, just straight up out of Harmor. Right, so that's the signal I generate. And then we filter it. But it's not enough, right? And because of these extreme cuts I've put in here, elements of the signal as a general overarching look of it have disappeared. Like the high end. Like I can't hear my awesome whiplash of these filters moving around. So I introduce Maximus. This is sort of a long video, but I'm trying to be just really detailed. So in a way also that makes sense because I've seen tutorials where I get so lost. So we have low, mids, highs, right? Maximus. I'm assuming you know what Maximus is. And I'm bringing the low end up just a touch. Honestly, boosting probably isn't the best idea here, but I did it in the moment. And this is stuff I go back during the mix, and I end up fixing it afterwards with an EQ. So this low end boost could be considered a timbral movement. It could be considered a general character change in that the stuff that would normally cause mud is just being removed anyways. So it's only going to affect stuff that I want my signal. So I'm okay. I can sort of justify this move a little bit. And then we have our mids and highs. The highs are the most important because they've been removed the most, and they give an indication of how bright and close the sound is. So you can see the highs have been brought back like a lot. They're also noticed that at this point it's really bright. And the mids, okay, the mids are also, you can almost say mud, especially when it comes to things like Maximus, because of where it decides the mid cutoff is. So like right around 200 to 5K, you just want to watch that range. 100 to 200 is another really big trouble range. You could change the cutoff filters. I usually don't unless I'm doing something. Another interesting thing we could try is linear phase. So you see how that changes there if we take it off? That is a phase difference. So if you grab Maximus, this is going to change your sound a lot. So if I toss a kick through Maximus, I know there's going to be a big phase shift. So I may grab another compressor that offers more exact filters because I really don't like what it does to some kicks. And other times I love what it does to some kicks. That's covered in the Maximus from the ground up. I also think I have a video on linear phase filters from an audio perspective because like most of them are either really complicated videos talking about designing them or they just don't exist. I don't know. I had the hardest time learning about them when I was new. So okay, low, mid, high, that's what's going on. You notice, so the high's been boosted. I even brought it up in post. So this was not enough. This is just the compression curve. And then the mids have been brought up. I did not boost them because I wanted to be careful. So I got a timbre, a general range of frequencies I could work with that I thought were cool. Then I ran the whole thing through a wave shaper. This has like been barely moved up. It's just a sort of, so in Maximus, K, there are these bands that cross over, and they can still, while they are great and stuff, they cause these phase shifts and things, and sometimes there's just a general reduction after processing like this. So I'll give it a small saturation boost, like the tiniest thing, and it usually will just add that last little character I'm looking for. Honestly, you might just be stoked with whatever comes out of here, and you make the adjustments accordingly using your compression envelopes. But this was my approach this go around. Okay, this next one is a color movement. This is the Isotope dynamic delay. I can't remember if I already talked about this, but basically it's a delay. You can get any delay. This delay features a filter, the ability to filter. And the reason I went with this one is because of its millisecond control. I forgot if the Fruity delay tap or whatever it's called. It's a multiple delay. Delay bank. They call it the delay bank. Has millisecond because their thing works on like a ratio principle. And they're coming out with Fruity Delay 3. And I haven't messed with it yet. So maybe that'll just fix all your problems. But what it is there's a filter in this one that allows me to send the stuff below it to a bottom delay, and I don't. So basically, I can leave my low frequency stuff untouched and only mess with the high frequency stuff, which is really great because now I am able to do all sorts of processing to it, and my low end, as far as spatial positioning and mixing is concerned, can be left alone. So this is a very timbral change. And as I move, okay, so I'll hit play. And okay, now this is with the delay on. So you notice the metallic texture. That's before, this is after. So it adds that metal-like texture. And if I move the delay, so this is only affecting the high frequencies. The wet's at 80 and the dry's at 40, meaning there's still the original signal in there, but the wet is, man, these help pins, I'm sure there's a way to turn that off. But the wet is slightly, I do like how they pop up super fast when you're over a knob. I hate like sometimes how, oh, never mind, you still have to wait. That's, I thought they won the game. Okay, so 80%. The wet, I just wanted a lot more process signal. And so when you do that and combine it with the dry of 40, the overall quality of the delay will overtake the original quality, but it will meld with it in sort of a nice way. So that's like my dry wet philosophy there. The feed's been brought up. That brings up the metal sound. If I brought this up more, it would bring up the metal sound even more. So you hear it. I didn't want that much though. And then we have our time. If we move this, you can get some really cool sounds. I left it there, but honestly, just a small movement can result in some pretty drastic changes. You want to be within what's called the Haas effect range. So it's 20 milliseconds and below will meld with the sound immediately on transient sounds. If it's not transient, if it's a tonal long sound, like here I could probably go past 20, but not very far. But if it was like a pad sound, you go all the way up to like 80 milliseconds, and it would still sound like it's part of the original sound before it sounds like a delay, like dun, dun. So that's what's going on there. Very cool. Mess with delays. And I only did the top hand. Now, if you're wondering, the Fruity Delay 2, which eventually will be 3, actually has a cutoff. So you can accomplish a similar thing. It's just you can't be as exact with the rate because it's like at a step ratio deal. Yeah, it's different. So that's what's going on there. Let's turn that off. After the delay, I wanted to do these movements at the beginning, right? That have these sort of teaser moments. That stuff. I wanted to use my bass at the beginning of my song, but not give away the bass. So the low pass comes into play. This is a pretty fast low pass. All it is a low pass. That's it. I like it. I like its sound. One of the first filters I like actually understood what was going on to a degree. So I used it a lot. And so now I just like it. The Fruity Free filter, I believe, is not being updated to 64-bit. I was reading on the forums. They want you to use the Love filter. I was kind of bummed out about that because I grew to love the Fruity. I actually grab it quite a bit, the fast filter. But, oh well, times change, right? So, okay, now after that, these two are mixing moves. So sound design is done. We've walked through all the sound design. That's what's going on. And so these are just various combinations of these parameters. So we've created a really dynamic sound. This thing is a pitch bend up 2 octaves. So that's what's going on there. So we rise up 2 octaves, but I'm moving around all my various timbral capabilities, and I get a really cool sort of riser sound. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, now let's talk about the EQ. So this EQ is a mixing EQ. If we look at my kick, so let's go to the kick. We'll turn the drums on now. So here's the kick. And I set it through a Maximus, and I brought up the... Okay, so this compression envelope, this is a whole nother deal. We'll talk about this stuff later. But anyways, if we look at where my kick is peaking, I created a very specific boost because this kick was very, very sharp and short. So I wanted it to have a little bit of low end punch. And if we look at it, it's sitting right there at 50 hertz. And so my bass is being cut off. I think it's actually before, it's like 60 hertz. So if you go down 10 hertz, this is where my kick lives. And so I'm like, up, I will go up here. And so now, I mean, there's still bass there and whatever. And I could make it steeper, and that probably wouldn't be a big deal. I get a little resonance boost, and it's probably more, I'm not sure how much more severe it is, but I think they actually do an okay job showing you that there's like a boost because of the filter design. Okay, so that's going on there. And there's a brief cut here to make room for, I believe, the snare. So the snare is like over here. So did that for the snare. Or it might be the, no, it's not the hat. And then if we listen to the sound still. There are still a couple moments where it comes out in a very bright way, especially on the whips. So I introduced a TDR Nova that is basically acting as a de-esser for a bass. And so we have our frequency spectrum, and I'm just compressing this range when it passes this. So the reason why this is better than doing the general cut I was talking about earlier is because if you do a general cut, that cuts in your sound for good. This will leave the frequencies that are important to your sound here and only turn them down when they get too loud. So I've set it at negative 6.4 dB with a almost a 5-to-1 compression ratio, and it sounds fine. You can even see what it's doing. And this allows me to have room for other things. And when I mix it and master it, I will oftentimes, I've been doing this. I find I get way better results when I do this. I'll mix it, and then when I master it, I'll bring stuff up according to taste. And so I basically do a second mixing session, but it's not as severe as the first one. Meaning I'm still as critical, but there are less moves to be made because I mixed it. So it shouldn't be as much work. So that is the bass design. That is what's going on. So now you know and are capable. And when you combine it with other things, I also have a filter here for reasons that I was making room for a couple other elements that were going on. And I messed here just rhythmically. I was like, oh, this could be interesting, but you can't. Not really a big deal here. So all together. This is actually way different. You see, I showed you how to do a thing. If you go back to the beginning and listen to it, you'll be like, whoa, this sounds way different. That one move, and you might be going, what's causing that change? That's the phaser. Phaser's a rolling deal, so it changes throughout. And because we made itsy bitsy change in processing throughout this tutorial, I have a completely different result. I can't even keep the same result through a tutorial because that's like how volatile some of these settings are. So I'm not going to save this, but anyways, I'll include an FLP link. You probably will have a crap ton of missing stuff. They'll be like, oh, contact's missing. This is missing. That's missing. This is missing. And, yeah, that's just the way it is. Sorry. I'm not going to that would be so much work to undo my template. Like, forget it. So yes. Also, if you're interested in the template, how the template works in getting this template, maybe you own Contact and getting like a blank version, with explanation, and there's actually a couple included. I have videos. You can look up Composing Gloves workflow template and you will find it. If you have any questions, let me know. Support me on Patreon. I deeply appreciate it. Did you find this explanation helpful and useful? Did you learn something? I want to know, because this has been really in detail with a lot more philosophy than usual. I normally don't go this far in depth. And so if you thought this was cool, if you got it and you normally don't get it, I would appreciate hearing that if you made it to the end of the video. I know there are parts that I assumed you know what's going on, but that's because I have whole series talking about some of these topics, like mixing is I've got a whole series on that. And I've even got it's going to be a degree here pretty soon. I'm almost done with my last class. So if you have any questions, let me know. Support me on Patreon again, because I really do appreciate it. And have a blessed day.
Fat man, easy.